Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, dear brothers and sisters, to a new episode of Huda tonight. This is your host, Omar Khaled. In the social discussion, we're going to have part 2 of the destructive sins, the major sins that are mentioned in one hadith by the Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him. There are 7 major sins, and we covered about 4 of them, and we're going to have the remaining, which are 3 sins, with Sheikh Ibrahim Zidan. So we would like to welcome him to the episode. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Ibrahim. Really happy to have you again, and really pleased to continue this interesting discussion. We talked about 4 of the major destructive sins, and now we have other 3. So the last one we talked about, that was usury, and we stopped when the 5th one was coming, and that's devouring the property. Let's not say only the money, the property of the orphan. It's of course a major sin in Islam to just oppress the orphan, not only take his money. So we would like to touch upon also in general that the vulnerable people, they have in Islam their rights, because as we talk about sometimes the capitalistic point of view of human beings and so on, they take advantage of them, and the vulnerable, they are just considered to be useless. As sometimes at the time of Hitler, he used to call the vulnerable people, they are useless eaters. They just live for eating, and that's it, and they don't add to the society. So we have this, like, how can we say, cooperation, and we have we can help each other and so on. We don't step on the necks of others just because we are strong and so on. So we would like to talk about the importance of taking care of the vulnerable in general in Islam.
Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam wa rasulullah wa ba'd. Those who are weak in any society and vulnerable, whether they are the orphans, in many cases are the women, and the young, those who do not have the physical strength, like the children and the like of this, and those who are sick and so on and so forth, some of them, they have no fault in this, and this is by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon them, and that's why it's mandatory for the entire society to basically to take care of them. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed verses like in Surah An-Nisa, for example, to establish these rights for those people, those who are weak in the society. And again, it's not their fault, so that means this is something that has to be taken care of. But other people, when they choose to be seeking from others and so on, then there's different rulings for them. And that's why the orphans, for example, an orphan is someone that lost his father before the age of puberty. And he's an orphan till he reaches the age of puberty. He does not stay an orphan for the rest of his life. So it's a period of time when a person does not have a father, and the importance and the significance of having a father in the life of the child is something so important. That's why the marriage, and how it's important to keep the marriage in place, and not to have relationships between men and women, for example, free mixing, whatever they want to do, because that harms that vulnerable in the society, which is the child, that he has a right to have a mother and a father.
That's what we see in the West, for instance, Sheikh Ibrahim, when you travel to the United States, fatherless societies, they are, like, we can say, filled with corruption, filled with people, like the young people, they are gone astray because they don't have role models. And also psychological problems, they are related sometimes to the religion itself. Some people, they become really the question, the religion itself, because they feel that they are not taken care of. So it can be a seed inside their hearts that they are not taken care of, so they take a view of Islam. That's why maybe my father didn't care about me and so on. So maybe you can touch upon this, Sheikh Ibrahim, if you will, about the United States, and not only among Muslims, but among the whole society in general, the West, they not valuing the unity between the father and the mother and the marriage. And now we have, like, we can say, cohabiting, and boyfriends and girlfriends, and like children out of wedlock and so on, and that can destroy really societies, at least in the future. Maybe right now they don't see the big effect, but after that, when the civilization falls down, if it starts to fall down, there will be the problem.
Right, and this is this is something that many people, the wise among them, they see the importance of it and how important it is to keep the family ties strong. But again, it's when there's no following what is right and following the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and people follow their desires, and the greed again comes in place, where a person just wants to fulfill his own desire. He doesn't really care about the outcome of things. So when people get into a relationship They're not too much worried about what's the outcome of this relationship. They are focused more on their immediate desire that they are seeking. And then things happen, and there's a child is born, and this child is not given his rights properly, one of which is that he's supposed to be within the fold of marriage for the rights of that child to be served. And all of a sudden he becomes an orphan, even though the father, he has no father, because the father has to be someone that is part of marriage. And this is in Islam is very important. And if a child comes without the matters of marriage, then he's not to be given to whatever father there is, right? Because he has no father. The father is only a father when there is a marriage between a man and a woman. So that's why the rights is being basically abused and lost in this case.
So what if, like a child, a young girl or boy, he or she, they are born out of wedlock. So what is the right of this child in Islam?
He has to be taken care of, and he belongs to the mother. And that's why the women, they would bear more of the burden of having children without marriage. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected them by ordering them to wear the hijab and to observe these rulings, and the relationships between men and women to be done in the proper way, and so on. And of course the society in large will be in charge to make sure that the rights of that child is taken care of. That's why there's the hadith from the Prophet ﷺ to take care of the orphans and so on, but it becomes the responsibility of the government and so on. But he is related to the mother, and there's no father for him.
So what if they remarry, or let's say not remarry, they marry after doing this mistake and this major sin, the father and the mother, they marry again? So
this is something that in the majority of the scholars, that it's not considered to be the child to be referred to that father, because he's not the father. You know, but if things happened and they've already been given within the fold of marriage, sometimes each case is a specific one, and people should refer to the people of knowledge. But again, having children outside the fold of marriage, there is no such a thing as a father there. That's why it's a huge problem. And that's why again the orphans, the subject of the orphans comes in place, because the orphans are a weak part of the society. That's why it's a virtuous thing to take care of them. And taking care of them is not just financially taking care of them, but having something like the father figure, someone to raise them, someone to educate them, someone they look up to. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, when he talked about the one that take care of the orphan, he said, أَنَا وَكَافِلْ يَتِيمْ كَهَتَيْنِ فِي الْجَنَّةِ, that me and the kafil of the yatim like this in Jannah, very close in Jannah, in paradise. But the word kafil, that means the caretaker, not necessarily the one that provides money and food and that's it, but someone that cares about the orphan, including of course financial needs and so on, but more importantly to be there for the orphan.
And teach him
to
be at his side.
Right, to have again like a father figure in his life. And this is something that is so important. And otherwise, people usually, they tend to take away the rights of the orphans, especially if their fathers left a lot of wealth for them, for example, and they're weak. Nobody is going after their needs. So somebody can take away this, whether it's an evil uncle or an evil grandfather, whatever there is. They might take the wealth of their father away, and they don't give them the rights.
So as a priority, who is the first man or woman that should take care of the orphan inside the family?
Well, it's if a father dies, for example, then it's the grandfather, if he's alive.
From the side of the father?
From the side of the father. And he becomes his guardian and so on. And if not, then it's the brother of the father. And it goes to the asaba, to the men in his family that has no females in between. Those who will be there for him, those who would support him, those who would raise him and so on. And it becomes, again, it's not a burden, but rather it's a responsibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask the people about. And observing these rulings, and of course there is something to do with the people of authority to make sure that things are done in the proper way. So it's not just left to the relatives and to the people, but still they have to overlook to make sure that the rights are being observed.
Was it prevalent and it was widespread at the time of the Prophet, or before he became a prophet and had the revelation, that the disbelievers, they used to do this to the orphans, or part of their ethics? Like sometimes they have good stuff like not lying, promising and not breaking the promises. So was it part of this? They took care of the orphan? Or no, they had the chance to destroy him or take his or her money, they would do this?
Some would do this and some would do otherwise. But there used to be something that, especially if the orphan is a female, they would, once she grow old and the one that is taking care of her, if he likes her, for example, he can basically not give in her rights or things of that nature, because he's the one in charge. So again, it's open for the greed of the people to decide what to do with the matters like this. And that's why, again, the ayat of the Quran is very clear to make sure that the orphans are well taken care of and the rights are given, and the severe punishment for those who would take the rights of the orphans, whether it's the wealth or so, that the punishment, as it's mentioned in the beginning of Surah An-Nisa, is a very severe punishment, that they're basically eating fire in their insides and their bellies and so on. So it's a very severe warning against those who take the wealth of the orphans without the right to do so.
You mentioned, Sheikh Ibrahim, that maybe the caretaker likes the girl and wants to marry her or something, maybe. So was this one of the reasons why Allah revealed in the Quran, one of the reasons to marry up to 4 wives? So this was, as Allah is giving this chance, an opportunity to the man to marry 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, not to maybe give himself a chance of stealing her or oppressing her and so on. Can we say this? This is one of the wisdom behind that?
It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed the matter to happen. So this is whether it's why the verses were revealed, but the ruling has nothing to do necessarily with the reason why the verses revealed. So whether this situation is present or it's not, it's still permissible for a man to marry 4, as long as he's just and so on. And as long as, of course, it brings what is good. So this is, yes, this was happening at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and this was the norm among many people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it permissible for them for the benefit and the goodness that comes as a result of it.
And I think, Sheikh Ibrahim, it's important to clarify that some people, when they attack Islam, they say, you marry 4 wives, but actually the verse doesn't say this. It says up to 5, up to 4, sorry. So 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you have to.
Right.
So it's not a general ruling for every and each person to do this. It differs from a person to another.
And it's with the condition, of course, there is adla, there is justice. And marriage is a very heavy responsibility because people, they only think of the relationship.
Yes.
Because when people meet, for example, they have no responsibility towards one another. Marriage is a very difficult thing. So many people, out of their sinful life that they live, they don't choose to get married because it's a burden. And responsibilities and spending from their money and so on. So they would rather have a relationship, you know, to fulfill their desires, and that's it. In Islam, of course, this is all is not permissible. It's a sinful act. And marriage, when someone is getting married, or that means there's responsibility, there's households to be supported, financially, non-financial matters, and it's the burden that comes with it. So it shows the sincerity of the person, that it's not just about the desires that a person is after. It's great also and noble reasons why this can be done.
So is this correct to say, according to marrying the 2nd wife, 3rd or 4th, or marrying even the 1st wife, that there are 5 rulings that can differ from each person to another? Like it can be forbidden, it can be the opposite, it can be a wajib, or it can be an obligation. And in between, it can be permissible, it can be disliked, it can be recommended. Is this a right approach to see marriage?
Yes, this is marriage in general, and it's different from one person to the other. Some people, marriage becomes mandatory for them if they have the means, and they will be committing sins if they don't get married. The marriage becomes mandatory for them. And marriage can be even forbidden for someone if he knows with certainty that he would harm the other partner in marriage. So it becomes not permissible for a person to harm someone else. And again, within the other rulings, it can be recommended. But this is the general ruling for marriage in general. And things in general brings what is good. But definitely when you look at the reality, and that's what the religion of Islam is, not about just things that would fit the desires of the people, things that would bring benefit to the individual and to the society and so on. You cannot have contradictions in rulings. You cannot have one ruling that to say, it is not permissible to have relationships outside the fold of marriage, but then you would allow for women to be in the society without being married, or men to stay without being married. You have to encourage and to make sure that everybody is married, so that everybody has needs, and these needs has to be fulfilled in the proper way. So you would never find then a solution to this. So that's why the issue of having more than one wife, it's inevitable to make sure that the rulings are consistent, and the great benefits that it brings again, and it's not something that is mandatory for each person to do. But this is another subject, of course. But and also part of taking care of those who are weak and vulnerable in the society, so that they have strength, they have someone to take care of them and to provide for them, and so on.
And that was also at the time of the Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, when after a war, and some of the companions, they die, and they leave orphans. So, correct me if I'm wrong, Sheikh Ibrahim, there were narrations that the companions used to go and rush to marry the widow, because they want to take care of the orphan, even if they are not that financially capable. They are really not that rich, but they want this because they want to support them, as you said, Sheikh Ibrahim, because the society has to be, like there must be a role model, must be somebody who sticks to the back of the child and teaches him morality and so on and so forth. Is this correct?
They used to have, at all levels, the care and the taking care of things and so on. And if it's becomes sometimes difficult unless there is marriage in place, because that person has to go in and out taking care of the child, and to protect oneself from the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then definitely the marriage is an important thing, especially also for the women, not just for the child. And this is something that was present at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. They were at ease with these matters, because again, to bring all what is benefiting. And taking care of orphans and raising them, they understood that this is a rewardable act. So they would compete with one another to make sure that that person will be with the Prophet ﷺ in Jannah. And with the reward comes the heavy responsibility that a person can also be among the people of the hellfire if he does not really take care of the rights of the orphans.
So what if a person says, well, if I don't take care of the orphan, and he's maybe part of the family, I'm risking it. I'm having a risk that maybe I'm going to go to hellfire, so I'm going to leave taking care of him. Maybe somebody else is going to take care of the child.
Right. Of course, this is a very negative approach. Why? Because sometimes it becomes mandatory if a person does not have a choice. If he's the guardian for the orphan, because it happened to be that he's the uncle and he has to take care of the orphan in the family, then he has no way out. So if he says, I'm not going to take that responsibility, he's already committing a sin by not taking care of the orphan. But it's important to realize that there is wealth, for example, that belongs to the orphan. And the one in charge of taking care of the orphan, even if it's, say, the mother, she's living with a child and the child inherited money from his father, that's the child's money. And when she spends from that money, she spends, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentioned in the Quran, with, there's no harm if she spends from this money for the benefit of the child and not for her own self. And, this is part of the religion. And things should not continue to be the way it was before the death, for example, of the father, where people just money comes and goes and so on. So now there are rights for that child that has to be respected, and it's to be given to him once he reaches the age of puberty and so on.
So was like there two different rules? The first one was abrogated. The first one is that they cannot eat anything from the money. But after, and they used to do this, the companions used to separate every single thing, even I think the plate of food, they used to make the orphan eat from it. And after that, there were verses that say that you can eat bil ma'ruf, which means that you can have, as we can say, a salary for you because you're taking care of the child if you are poor under this condition. Is this true?
Yes, but it's not as a salary that a person would decide for himself, but basically spending from the money of the orphan to take care of the orphan. And even sometimes investing in that money so that it would bring more money. So if the money is used for the benefit of the orphan, there is no harm whatsoever. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best.
And you don't take any penny from it?
If it's with ma'ruf, yes, a person can take, because he has to eat with the orphan, for example. He has to live, they live together. So sometimes it's difficult to separate both money, and that's what basically the purpose behind it is, that the matter becomes at ease, not very strict and difficult with the penny and so on. And if a person is rich, of course, it's better for him to avoid this completely. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, and that's why the verses, when it was revealed, it has the severe warning, because at the end, nobody can really strictly, go after the one that take care of the orphan with every single penny. He has to have that level of the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his heart.
So the Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, Allah chose that he was an orphan. So what lessons we can learn from this as caregivers to the orphans, and also if somebody is watching us and he wants to know more about that, it's not shameful to be an orphan, it's not your mistake, and the most honorable person on earth was an orphan. So we would like to touch upon two points.
Right. As you said, the Prophet ﷺ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about him that he found him yatiman fa'awa. The Prophet ﷺ was an orphan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed that for him, ﷺ, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to raise him. And therefore, it's not a shameful thing. And there's no shame whatsoever if someone is in a situation that it's not because of his own fault. When people are created, white or black, or in this place or this land, or being orphans or whatever, there's no say for them. So why people should look down at them? This is part of being really foolish, and also being unjust. But rather people should focus on the things that people have a say in it. If a person has a fault in something, yes, he should be held accountable for his actions, and still he can repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And being an orphan, it doesn't mean that that person's life will be ruined, or he has to continue to be poor and needy and so on. Actually, the opposite can be even more likely for the orphan, because we have in the Prophet ﷺ the best example. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most just. And many people, when they lost their father or their mother when they're very young in age, you would find that they have a very successful life. And the pain that the person will go through is rewarded by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's no such a thing as excuses that we take for ourselves because we have some weakness or less fortunate than others in the society and so on. A person should do the best they can, seeking the roots from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that provides, He's the one that guides, and it's not according to what human beings necessarily think.
So this weakness can turn to be a strength if somebody believes in Allah, that this can be a blessing in disguise. So Sheikh Ibrahim, I sometimes think about that also, about when the Prophet was an orphan, that so many, or let's say some of the like 5 Ullal Azm, the 5 prophets, that they are the major 5 messengers of Allah, that one of them didn't have a father, Prophet Isa. One of them had a problem with his father, that he was a disbeliever, and not only a disbeliever, he was the one who makes idols. That's the father of Prophet Ibrahim. And Prophet Musa, there is no mention about the father of Prophet Musa, there is a mention of the mother. So can we see through this that Allah is preparing them, that the direct tarbiyah, or the direct pedagogy and educating and like bringing them up comes directly from Allah, and the orphan can really be delighted on this, that he can feel like he's directly getting taken care of?
Yes, and they were prophets of Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that raised them to be who they are. And that's true also for the orphans, and that's why there's a great responsibility on other people to take care of the orphans. Because they are vulnerable, they can be taken away by sources of evil, because they have nobody to watch over them. So that's why it becomes a responsibility for the individuals, those who are around them, to make sure that they are given whatever is needed to be protected from harm. So it goes both ways, and that's once that strength is there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless that strength. And people can be very successful in the societies, and I believe most of the people, they know somebody that was an orphan, and he's very successful in his life when he grows old.
SubhanAllah. So the next, inshallah, the major sin that we're going to talk about after the short break, it's going to be about fleeing from the battlefield. We're going to cover this after a short break, inshallah. So dear brothers and sisters, we're going to go to a short break and come back with Sheikh Ibrahim Zidan to continue on the destructive sins, the 7 destructive sins. Stay tuned. Ooh. 'Cause 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 'c
really come to understand that to be a Muslim, to be someone who says they've surrendered and submitted to the will of God, is to be in harmony with everything around you and to be a benefit to everyone.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our Creator, He gave us a life plan. He told us what to do. He gave us, goals and what He expects from us.
It has roots in Islam because the first man who was created, Adam, he was neither a Jew or a Christian, but he submitted himself to God. Abraham, he didn't submit to anyone in creation. He didn't even hear in any of these religions. But when he was told to do what? Submit to the will of God, that's Islam.
Attached to his preconceived notions.
Yes.
And if he looks with an objective eye and an open heart, he'll see it. Unless Allah for some reason has something over his eyes because of something that we don't know is in his heart.
You had from 1980 to 2005, you had the FBI data report showing that now from all these years that only 6% had any links to Islam. 94% were people who had nothing to do with Islam.
This is the Deen Show. This is the Deen Show.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, dear brothers and sisters. We're going to continue what we left off about the 7 destructive sins with Sheikh Ibrahim Zidane. Welcome again, Sheikh Ibrahim. So the last thing that we're talking about, that the fleeing from the battlefield is a major sin. But the first question that comes to mind is, well, if I'm coward, or let's say I become coward in a moment of fear, isn't that natural as a human being? I can face a calamity, I can face a problem, and in the battlefield maybe I can hear the gunpowder and the gun bullets and the barrage of missiles, so I feel scared and run away. So why is it so major?
This is actually something that is a crime in most of the countries where a person would do that, because it's not just about being a coward. It's something that can bring so much harm, not just to oneself, but to the entire army that is in the battlefield. So that's why there are certain situations where a person has to go to that level of sacrifice. And the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, لا تتمنوا لقاء العدو ولكن إذا لقيتموهم فاثبتوا أو فاصبروا. That means do not seek, do not wish to meet your enemies, but if you meet them, then be patient. Right? So don't wish to be in harm's way. Don't wish to be tested and to be tried. But if it happened, then seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you strength. So someone in that situation, right, and it happened and it's already there, then he has to be patient and seek rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because it's caused great harm, whether it's not just to the morals of the people, but also to physically. And that's why it's important for people to be in that state of sacrifice so that they don't harm other people. And it's even, there are many rulings like this. If a person, for example, is forced to kill an innocent person, can he say, well, I was forced, and he will be innocent? No, he's not innocent. He should not kill that innocent person.
His self is not more valuable than the self of the other.
Because why would he choose his own life and not the life of another individual? So if he say, but they will kill me, let them kill you, what can he do? So you're killed. If that person is killed, he become a martyr, inshallah ta'ala, and he get rewards for it. But he should not take the life of others to save his own life. There's no such a thing. Right? The level of necessity can make a person commit a sin to save his life. But that sin, it's not to take the life of another human being to save his own life. So
like if
there's
I'm
a life
forced
is lost.
to drink alcohol, for instance, like on the gunpoint,
Right.
then
it's permissible.
This is
Even to say the word of disbelief, and being on gunpoint, it's permissible to say that, and his heart is, of course, is content with that iman. But to take the life of others, this is something that is not permissible, which shows the importance of the protecting the blood and so on, and not to shed blood and so on.
And also, I think if in the battlefield people are forced, and that happened by some of the narrations of people, they went to certain battlefields, if they are forced and if they say no, and they are big number, a huge number of people, we don't think that they're going to be killed. Actually, they're going to be a threat to the one who is trying to oppress them.
Right. And again, this is in the context of war, of course. And that's what even the word in the hadith to run away from the battlefield in the war that is justified with people, authorities, and so on.
So if we take from this, if somebody is protecting the dignity or the money of his family or of his property, and he runs away, would it be something equivalent to that?
Not really, but it's a virtuous thing that he will be steadfast, and if he killed in that process, he's a martyr, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said that whoever dies protecting his wealth, he's a martyr. Whoever dies protecting, defending his honor, like his wife, his daughter, for example, and he dies in that, for that sake, he will be a martyr. And also the one that would defend himself. So is it something mandatory for the person to do? It's not mandatory. So if someone, a thief or some armed person walks into his property and he wants to kill him, if he doesn't give him his money, for example, he has the choice. If he would defend himself and as a result of that he was killed, he's a martyr, as the Prophet ﷺ said. But if he, as you said, a person being coward or so, he's not to be blamed in this case.
But is there a difference between if I'm protecting myself or not? This can be my choice. But if my children, my wife, my mother, so is it equal to each other?
Of course. No, of course it's not equal.
It's not equal.
Right, and a person definitely would go further to protect his family, to protect his children, to protect his wife. And if in that, course he died, he's a martyr, as the Prophet ﷺ said.
And subhanAllah, what got my attention, Sheikh Ibrahim, that part of the hadith when a companion went to the Prophet and asked about if somebody forced me to give him my money, the meaning of the hadith is that the first word that the Prophet said, "La tu'tihi malak." Don't give him your money. And it's like instilling inside us and instigating us not to have this, like, how can we say, passivity. Or that we are not going to stand for ourselves, because he wants to instill in us that the thief, if he knows that among the Muslims and the believers they have the spirit, that they are not going to really give the car if they are at gunpoint, they're going to fight for their lives. And some of people, they really succeed in doing this and not giving in or giving up their property. I think so many of the thieves, they're not going to do what they are going to do.
Right. And it's opposite to what people are being told.
SubhanAllah.
Just give it away, save your life, and so on. But again, it's not a sinful thing if a person is not able to do so. Some people, they don't have the means. They are really in a gunpoint that they cannot move, they cannot do anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us.
So, Sheikh Ibrahim, I think there is also an exception if somebody is running from the battlefield for the purpose of joining another legion or another, let's say, brigade inside the army, or another team. So maybe somebody, if he looks at me from outside, like from far away, well, he is running away, but I'm not running away actually. We are making maybe a decoy, or making like it's a trap. We're doing it to get the disbelievers in.
Right, and this is mentioned in the Quran clearly. And if a person is doing that, whether it's by an order from his commander, for example, then it's part of the tactics of the war. Even though he looks, as you said, that he's running away, but he's basically bringing more benefit. Or if a person individually, to make a decision like that, it's something that is, according to the how things are within armies and so on. Right, and of course, sometimes this is something that people have to refer back to the people in charge of them, because they would know best how to deal with situations, and they receive the proper training what to do in certain situations, but not to cause harms, to others.
There are verses in the Quran, Sheikh Ibrahim, that says that there is, like, we can say, lightening up the burden among the believers. They had to fight, like, if they are 20, they fight 200. Is this right? The tenfold.
Right.
And after that, it wasn't like this. It was like only twofold.
Right.
So the meaning of these verses, that if the number of the army against us is more than us, like tenfold or twofolds, according to both verses, that we can run in that time, or what is the meaning of this?
Yes, this is part of one of the implications of the rulings that has been abrogated. So if it's the number is, or even the power is double than the number of the believers, then it's not permissible for the believers to flee. If it's more than that, and if they flee, then there's no harm.
Subhanallah.
Right, but if it's up to double, But in general, a person should fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that's one of the implications to it.
It's according to the numbers or according to the strength?
The numbers is the measure of the strength at the time. So it's also strength, when a person's, if he's facing in matters of army, if the strength is only double, then he has no rights to run away.
Under any condition, fighting an enemy, can it be haram, for instance, in some of the times, because we don't have the power to do so?
Well, these types of things is to be decided by the people in charge. And that's why it's not an individual task. So when a person is in charge, people of authority, they're the ones that will be able to judge whether it's benefiting or not, of course, justified or not. And if they make a mistake, and there are people of goodness and justice and so on, they get rewards. So it's something that can be a good decision or a bad decision, but at the end it's a very complex situation, but it's for those who are in charge of the
because
Ummah.
They have the experience.
They have the experience, they have the means, they know what others do not know. They know their strength, whether they're able to or not. And people, of course, has to be obedient to them in matters of ma'ruf.
That takes us, Shaykh Ibrahim, to the time of the Prophet, when Khalid ibn Walid, may Allah be pleased with him, he used to be like the head of the army. I think it's Ghazwat Mu'tah. And he went back with the army. And some of the people, they accused the army and said that you are fleers. You fled away from battlefield. And the Prophet didn't say and use this word and said something that means that they went back and they are preparing for another fight again. So what happened in this Ghazwa, and what is the virtue of Khalid ibn Walid in this Ghazwa?
Right, when the Romans were far more than the believers, and this actually was considered to be a victory when Khalid radiallahu anhu, he did not continue with the battle and he left. And the Prophet ﷺ did not call them that they fled, but rather they are the ones that are going against their enemy. So they were praised, and it was considered to be a win for the believers, because the Romans at the time, they did not really give any significance to the power of the Arabs, but now the Prophet ﷺ is the prophet of the deen of Islam, and the matter is different now. It's not just Arabs versus the Romans, but rather it's a war for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala superior. So they were able to stand in front of this superpower at the time that brought what is best afterwards, and they were defeated, and the Muslims, they were well established then. So this is something that shows that an individual situation, the ruling is not a general ruling for all things. It depends on the benefits and the losses of every situation, especially when there's someone in charge to be obeyed.
SubhanAllah. So the last major destructive sin is slandering the chaste women. And what caught my attention when I first read this hadith, that it is mentioned not to slander, or to say false testimonies about women. And the first question is, are they only women, or it's also included when you talk about men too, that it is also a major sin exactly like it?
It's for both men and women,
Both
of course, but for the honor of the woman is far more affected than that is for the men. Even though that it's the same, it's a major sin. But for women, once a woman is a chaste woman, a believing woman, that one of the most valuable things for her is her chastity. So when that is being attacked, usually human beings, the way they function in this, once it's attacked, even if it's false, the reputation does not come back again the way it was. And that's why the harm is very severe harm. And for someone that honors this so much and sacrifice for this in their life, they value it. But for others, they don't care about their chastity, they might not value these types of things.
So the word al-muhsanat, it can vary in meaning. It can mean that somebody is married. It can mean it's chaste also.
Right, it can give the meaning of someone that is married. It depends on the context. But here it means any chaste woman, someone that is not known to be promiscuous in her behavior and things of that nature. So when someone slander her or accuse her of committing zina, adultery or so, then this is such a severe crime, a destructive sin that brings punishment in this life and hereafter.
And the word al-ghafilat, what does it mean?
The word al-ghafilat comes in the meaning, literally it means someone that is ignorant, someone that is not really aware of things. It has the meaning of that, whether they are not aware of what the slandering is all about, but also has a great meaning and a great quality for the Muslim women, the believers, is that she's not aware of the ways of men and the mixing and the life of sin. She's away from this.
SubhanAllah.
She's not exposed to this type of lifestyle, which makes her more shy and more away from these evil things, so that she becomes a faithful person for her, towards her husband. And many people, they do not really focus on this great quality. A woman's supposed to be in that state, and that's how she's protected. But for her to be, very well experienced of how the tricks of men that are more, they trick and they do all kinds of things to go against or to go after their desires. And the righteous woman, she doesn't know these things. She's away from the ways of men and so on.
SubhanAllah. So what caught also my attention, Sheikh Ibrahim, that when I saw that they are mentioned among the destructive sins, slandering chaste women, that the zina or fornication or adultery itself, which we know that it is really one of the major sins, big major sins, it's not mentioned among the 7 destructive sins. How is that so?
Right. Of course, it's a major sin. And in some of the narrations, it's mentioned that it's a destructive sin, of course. But one of, some of the narrations doesn't have it, but it's still a major sin. It's one of the destructive sins, of course. But as you see here, just slandering someone or accusing someone, which entails in itself that how evil it is, this crime. When someone is, if someone is accused of stealing, for example, it's a punishable crime, but not as severe as someone to be accused of committing zina. That means zina is much more severe than even many other crimes. And a person might, for a woman, for example, if she died or she committed adultery, maybe for her it's far more harmful that she's accused of being an adulteress than that she was, for example, died or killed.
SubhanAllah. So Shaykh Ibrahim, the 7 destructive sins, most of them, they are action-oriented. That some people, they are doing magic, they are devouring the property of the orphan, like eating up usury. You see action here, but there is you don't see the actions of the heart, like enviness, for instance, like hatred, like plotting against maybe the Muslims and so on. So why is this so?
Well, this is still, all of these things are sinful acts. And there are sinful acts done by the heart, which is far worse than these, shirk, for example, is something done by the heart. But again, it has 2 things to it. One of which is the hadith mentioned these specific sins as destructive sins. It doesn't take away the severity of the other sins. The other also meaning that can be, that we can learn from this is that when the heart is polluted with other things, then these physical acts will be in place. So when someone protected from these destructive sins that are done physically, that means that's a sign that that person has a good heart, that he worked on the evil actions done by the heart. Because many of the diseases of the heart, if it's not cured, that it leads to these physical sins. And many of these sins is a sign that the person has other evil things inside. So, for example, arrogance can lead the person to many of these physical sins.
He can do magic against another person, he can kill.
Right. And that's why they go both together. And if it goes both ways, the person has to work on his heart to purify his physical actions and also to protect ourselves physically from affecting our hearts negatively. And also it's destructive from the perspective that the physical sins, nobody has an excuse to say, I couldn't help it but doing it, because that means you did something physically in order to stay away from it.
Right. You planned for it, you prepared for it. And so.
In which the things done by the heart, a person might have different perspectives, he didn't, feelings, it's not something that can be measured precisely, different than how things when it's done physically.
So what's inside the heart, if it is not translated or conveyed into action, am I going to be taking accountable for it?
Some things are. For example, bad intentions, arrogance, envy, although it has to show in some of one's actions and speech and so on. But there are deeds in the heart that might not show in one's appearance. Hypocrisy, for example, a person showing off his actions, Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best what's in the heart of the person. So some things are like this, and some things that, as long as it doesn't show, like whims, not really actions done by the heart, but whims or thoughts that comes in one's mind, whispers of shaitan. If a person doesn't say anything, doesn't act according to this, there's no harm. And he pushes away, of course, before it becomes a deed. You know, and that's why, for example, if a person is walking in the streets, the shaitan doesn't care which sin that person commits. So he whispered to him to commit a sin, whatever sin there is. But if that person committed the sin, shaitan comes back again. Now he has a weak way to that person to get into his heart. So he will work on the same sin till it becomes a disease in the heart. Till it becomes part of one's heart. And that person then is easy to be in state of submission to the ways of shaitan.
SubhanAllah. So, Shaykh Ibrahim, we talked about these destructive sins. There are, of course, other destructive sins. But I want to focus on the belittled sins, muhaqqarat al-dhunub, which the Prophet alluded to, that they are sins that we think they are little, they are just minor sins, and if they are gathered together, they're going to destroy the person. But what if a person says, if I do these minor stuff, I don't do any major sins, I do minor sins, and I pray my prayers, I do Umrah, from Umrah to Umrah, I fast Ramadan, so maybe they are going to be forgiven. So what is the answer to this person?
If that statement is being said when a person is still committing the minor sins and he has persistency and he has no plans to repent, this attitude is a major sin.
SubhanAllah.
And the more the person belittles a sin, the more that sin gets bigger. It's not that the sin is big, but it's the attitude of the person. It's a sign of the disease in the heart. So, and that's why israr, or to be persistent in a sin, that's a major sin by itself.
SubhanAllah.
So instead a person should repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or she should not be persistent in it. And these are the things that were Ramadan to Ramadan and Jumu'ah to Jumu'ah and the 5 daily prayers expiate these sins as long as there's no persistent attitude in it. And a person is constantly repenting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
And the opposite also is true. If somebody committed a destructive sin, it doesn't mean that this is the end of the world. If you repent from it, it's over. It's like if you haven't done it before.
Right. No matter what sin a person committed, if he sincerely or she sincerely repents to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, quit the sin, and have the regret of the sin, and have the strong intention that he won't commit it again, and if there's rights of the other human beings to be given, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most forgiving. But the evenness of things is when a person will take the path of sin. That's why even some of the ulama, when they made the tafsir of the verse about the believers, those who stay away, those who stay away from sins except al-lamam, many of course they describe it as the minor sins, but also some said it's the major sin that is done one time like this and a person repented to Allah. Not that he wants to do it to repent, it happened. But he repented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he did not take the path of the sin to leave matters of the deen.
It's not part of his life or her life.
Right. He is just an action, something happened, a slip that he did, and he repented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala afterwards.
So what if I fall down again into the sin after repenting and sincerely, maybe after 6 months or 4 months, I do it again? Sometimes people, they give up and say, well, that means that Allah didn't accept my repentance. That means that I'm not sincere. So that can give them the, let's say, the push to go further and do the sin. Well, I'm not forgiven anyway.
This is all the tricks and ways of shaitan, Iblis. The devil, he wants people to think this way. So something that makes it very easy for us to understand this concept very well, because it's a very serious matter. It's not about being sinless, but it's about being repentant slaves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So never, there's nothing whatsoever should prevent the person from repenting to Allah. No matter how many sins, how big the sin is, there's no such a moment or a situation when it comes to the believer would say there's no repentance for you. If a person has this clearly in his life, he would definitely always repent. And that would help him to be away from the sin and to continue to be away from the sin till Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect him.
So it's a big trick by shaitan.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Shaykh Ibrahim. The time flies with you. I always have the pleasure to talk with you, Shaykh Ibrahim, and learn a lot from you. Jazakallah khairan. And thank you, dear brothers and sisters, for joining us in 2 parts talking about the 7 destructive sins in the hadith of the Prophet. We would like from time to time to cover some of the sayings of the Prophet, and we try to analyze them, and we talk about some of the questions revolving around them with Sheikh Ibrahim. So until next time, in the care of Allah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.